The people who laugh the loudest at something worthless are usually the ones who fail to recognize value when it is standing right in front of them. The crystal lights of the Manhattan Heritage Auto Gala shimmered across polished marble floors, scattering reflections like diamonds beneath the feet of New York's elite. Beneath the towering glass ceiling, collectors, investors, celebrities, and reporters moved through rows of rare automobiles worth fortunes, each vehicle displayed like a priceless work of art. The air carried the quiet confidence of wealth, where conversations about seven-figure purchases sounded as casual as discussing the weather. Alicia Bennett felt slightly out of place among them, not because she lacked confidence but because her world looked very different from theirs. At 34, the Black single mother spent her weekdays teaching third grade at a public elementary school in Brooklyn. Her life revolved around lesson plans, grocery budgets, parent conferences, and making sure her 9-year-old son, Caleb, never felt the absence left behind by the father who had disappeared years ago. Yet tonight she stood beneath the same glittering chandeliers as billionaires and collectors, her hands wrapped around an old silver key. The key belonged to the vehicle parked at the far end of the exhibition hall. Compared to the gleaming Ferraris, restored Mustangs, and vintage European masterpieces surrounding it, Alicia's car looked almost invisible. Its faded navy paint carried the scars of decades. The chrome trim had lost much of its shine. Small imperfections marked nearly every panel. To most people it appeared ordinary, forgettable, old. But to Alicia, it was the last piece of her father still left in the world. Caleb stood beside her, staring up at the massive room with wide eyes. "Mom," he whispered, tugging gently at her sleeve. "Do you think someone will buy Grandpa's car?" Alicia smiled softly and brushed a hand over his shoulder. "Maybe," she answered. "Maybe not. We're just here to see what happens." She did not tell him how desperately she needed a miracle. The private academy Caleb had earned admission to required tuition she could. Bare la immagine pain. Selling the car felt like surrendering a piece of her family history, but mothers learned to sacrifice things they loved. Sometimes quietly, sometimes without anyone noticing. Across the room, a sudden wave of attention swept through the crowd. Cameras turned. Reporters gathered. Conversations paused. Grayson Whitmore had arrived. At 41, the white billionaire collector was one of the most recognizable faces in the automotive world. His television series attracted millions of viewers. His private collection was legendary. When Grayson Whitmore spoke about a car, markets listened. Investors followed. Reputations changed. He moved confidently through the exhibition floor, greeting executives and collectors until his attention drifted toward the far corner of the room, toward Alicia's car. His expression shifted. A small smile appeared. Then a laugh. Not cruel. Not loud. Just confident enough to draw attention. "Well," he said, glancing at the vehicle before looking toward the crowd, "that may be the ugliest car I've ever seen." Laughter immediately rippled through the room. A few guests turned to look. Others smiled politely. Someone snapped a photograph. Caleb's face fell. Alicia felt every eye moving toward them. But she didn't react. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she simply tightened her fingers around the old silver key and looked at the car her father had loved for more than 30 years. The crowd laughed. Alicia didn't. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need defending. Sometimes it only needs time. The laughter faded long before Alicia and Caleb left the gala, but some words had a way of lingering in the silence afterward. Outside, Manhattan glowed beneath a cool spring night, its skyscrapers reflecting thousands of lights across the Hudson like scattered stars. Alicia drove carefully through the city streets, the old Navy car humming softly beneath her hands. Caleb sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring through the window. Normally he filled every car ride with questions, stories from school, or observations about things only a child seemed able to notice. Tonight he was silent. Alicia knew why. Children often pretended to be stronger than they felt. They learned it from watching their parents. The small apartment in Brooklyn greeted them with familiar comfort. Warm yellow light spilled from the kitchen. Family photographs lined the hallway. A second-hand bookshelf stood beside the living room window, packed with novels, school supplies, and framed memories. It was not luxurious. It was not impressive. But it was home. Caleb disappeared into his room while Alicia hung her coat near the door. A few minutes later she found him sitting on his bed holding an old photograph. His grandfather smiled back from the faded picture, standing proudly beside the same car parked downstairs. The image had been taken decades earlier, long before Alicia was born. The corners were worn from years of being handled. Caleb traced the edge of the photograph with his finger. "Grandpa really loved that car, did he not?" he asked quietly. Alicia sat beside him and smiled. More than anybody could understand. Caleb looked down. "Then why are we selling it?" The question settled heavily between them. Alicia took a slow breath. She had rehearsed the answer many times, but saying it aloud never became easier. Because sometimes life asks us to choose between what we want to keep and what we need to protect. Caleb frowned slightly. "I do not understand." Alicia brushed a hand gently through his hair. "When your grandfather got sick, he made me promise something." Her voice softened. "He told me that memories should never become chains. He said if there ever came a day when that car could help the people I love, I should let it go without guilt." Caleb stared at the photograph. "Did you promise?" "I did." The room grew quiet again. Outside, distant traffic drifted through the window. Somewhere below, a siren echoed before fading into the city. Caleb looked toward her. "Do you think Grandpa would be sad?" Alicia felt emotion tighten in her chest. She shook her head. "No. I think he would be proud." Later that evening, after Caleb had fallen asleep, Alicia stood alone by the apartment window. The silver key rested in her palm, cool and familiar. She remembered her father teaching her how to drive in empty parking lots on summer evenings. She remembered road trips, old music playing through worn speakers, and the way he always called the car his greatest adventure. Not because it was valuable, not because it was rare, but because it carried memories no amount of money could buy. Alicia glanced down at the key and smiled sadly. Tomorrow she would begin the process of finding a buyer. Tomorrow she would let go. What she did not know was that hidden somewhere inside the aging vehicle waited a secret untouched for decades. A secret that was already moving quietly toward her life like fate itself. The next afternoon arrived wrapped in soft spring sunlight that spilled across the narrow Brooklyn street, outside Alicia's apartment building. Saturday usually meant laundry, grocery shopping, and catching up on lesson plans for the week ahead. But this morning felt different. The decision had been made. The car would be prepared for sale. Alicia carried a small box of cleaning supplies downstairs while Caleb followed closely behind, determined to help. The old Navy vehicle sat quietly along the curb, its faded paint reflecting the city skyline in broken fragments. For a moment Alicia simply stood there, looking at it. Memories seemed to live in every scratch and every worn edge. Caleb opened the passenger door and climbed inside. "Where should I start?" he asked. Alicia smiled. "Anywhere you want." For the next hour they worked together beneath the warming sun. Alicia cleaned the exterior while Caleb dusted the interior with the seriousness of someone entrusted with an important mission. Music drifted from a nearby apartment window. Neighbors passed on the sidewalk. The ordinary rhythm of the city continued around them. Then suddenly everything changed. "Mom!" Caleb's voice echoed from inside the car. "Come look at this." Alicia turned immediately. Something in his tone made her pause. She walked around to the passenger side and found him kneeling on the seat, staring at a loose section beneath the dashboard. "I accidentally pushed this," he explained, "and it opened." Alicia leaned closer. A narrow hidden compartment had appeared behind a worn panel. Neither of them had ever noticed before. Dust coated the small space inside. For a moment neither spoke. Then Caleb carefully reached in and pulled something out. It was an envelope. Old. Yellowed with age. Perfectly preserved. Alicia's pulse quickened. She accepted it gently, almost afraid it might fall apart in her hands. Her father's handwriting covered the front. The sight of it instantly tightened her throat. She had not seen those familiar letters in years. Slowly she opened the envelope. Inside rested a single black and white photograph. Caleb leaned closer. "Who is that?" Alicia stared at the image. A younger version of her father stood beside the car decades earlier. But he was not alone. Next to him stood a man neither Alicia nor Caleb recognized. Tall. Confident. Wearing a racing uniform. Behind them, A crowd filled what appeared to be a professional racetrack. Across the bottom of the photograph, written in fading blue ink, were 5 words. "Never forget what happened here." Alicia read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Something about it felt important, deliberate, like a message left behind waiting to be discovered. She turned the photograph over. More handwriting appeared on the back. This time only a name. Harrison Reed. Caleb frowned. Who is Harrison Reed? Alicia slowly shook her head. I do not know. But even as she spoke, a strange feeling settled over her. The kind of feeling people experience when they stand at the edge of a mystery, without realizing how large it truly is. Above them, sunlight glimmered against the windshield. The old car sat silently beside the curb, guarding secrets that had remained hidden for decades. And somewhere beyond Brooklyn, that single forgotten name was about to change everything. That evening, after Caleb had gone to bed, Alicia sat alone at her small kitchen table with a laptop, a cup of cooling tea, and the photograph spread carefully before her. The city outside had settled into its familiar nighttime rhythm. Traffic moved beneath glowing streetlights. Apartment windows flickered like distant stars across Brooklyn. Yet Alicia could not stop staring at the name written on the back of the photograph. Harrison Reed. She typed the name into a search engine with little expectation. Thousands of results appeared instantly. At first she assumed she had found the wrong person. Then an old newspaper image filled her screen, and her breath caught. The man in the article was the same man standing beside her father in the photograph. Younger, confident, unmistakable. Alicia leaned closer. Harrison Reed had once been one of the most celebrated race car drivers in America. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, he had become a legend in professional motorsports. Headlines called him the Golden Falcon. Fans traveled hundreds of miles to watch him race. Sponsors competed for his endorsement. His victories had become part of racing history. Yet one article after another revealed something strange. His career had ended suddenly, unexpectedly, after a mysterious event connected to a private exhibition vehicle that had disappeared from public records decades earlier. Alicia felt her pulse quicken. She clicked another article, then another. Each piece revealed fragments of a story that seemed incomplete. Missing pages, missing details, missing answers. The next morning she carried the photograph to the New York Automotive Historical Society, a quiet building tucked between older brick structures in Manhattan. She almost turned around before entering. Places like this usually belong to experts, collectors, and enthusiasts, not elementary school teachers from Brooklyn. But something pushed her forward. Inside, an elderly archivist named Leonard Hayes studied the photograph through a magnifying glass. His expression changed immediately. "Where did you get this?" he asked softly. Alicia explained about her father, the hidden compartment, and the old car. Leonard removed his glasses and stared at her for several seconds. "Do you realize what this might be?" Alicia shook her head. Leonard slowly stood and walked toward a cabinet filled with historical records. Several minutes later he returned carrying a large folder. Carefully he opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, and faded race reports. He placed one image beside Alicia's photograph. The match was undeniable. The same car. The same vehicle sitting quietly on a Brooklyn street. Leonard's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "For 40 years collectors have searched for this automobile." Alicia blinked. "Why?" The old archivist looked down at the photograph again. "Because according to racing history, it vanished." Silence filled the room. Outside, traffic moved past the windows. Somewhere nearby a clock ticked steadily. Leonard continued. "Not only did it vanish, it was connected to one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American motorsports." Alicia felt the room suddenly grow smaller. "You are saying my father's car is famous?" Leonard shook his head slowly. No, his eyes remained fixed on the photograph. "I am saying your father's car may be priceless." By the following morning, the story had already begun moving beyond the walls of the Historical Society. Leonard Hayes had contacted several respected automotive historians, expecting cautious curiosity. Instead, he received immediate responses. Emails arrived within hours. Phone calls followed. Experts from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Charlotte requested photographs, vehicle records, and ownership documentation. The reaction surprised even Leonard. For decades, the missing automobile had existed almost like a myth among collectors. People knew the stories. People debated the rumors. But nobody expected the vehicle to suddenly appear on a quiet street in Brooklyn owned by an elementary school teacher who had never attended a collector auction in her life. Alicia spent most of that day trying to continue her normal routine. She taught mathematics lessons. She graded assignments. She smiled at students and answered questions about homework. Yet her phone continued vibrating inside her desk drawer. Each notification brought another message, another request, another inquiry about the car. By afternoon, local automotive blogs had published articles about the discovery. By evening, national collector forums were discussing little else. The Old Navy vehicle had become the center of attention almost overnight. Meanwhile, several miles away in Manhattan, Grayson Whitmore sat inside the glass-walled office of Whitmore Automotive Holdings overlooking Central Park. His morning began with interviews, investment meetings, and production discussions for his television series. Everything followed its usual schedule until his assistant entered carrying a tablet. "You should see this," she said. Grayson barely glanced up. "Another auction?" "Not exactly." She placed the tablet on his desk. A headline filled the screen. "Mysterious vehicle linked to Harrison Reed may have been found after 40 years. Grayson frowned. Harrison Reed was a name every serious collector recognized. He opened the article. Seconds later, another image appeared. His expression changed. The photograph showed the same vehicle he had mocked only days earlier. The same faded Navy car. The same forgotten machine standing at the edge of the gala floor. He leaned back in his chair. "This cannot be real." His assistant crossed her arms. "Several historians are already confirming the connection." Grayson looked at the image again. For the first time since the gala, uncertainty entered his thoughts. Throughout the week, the attention only intensified. Television networks requested interviews. Automotive publications released special reports. Experts examined historical photographs and race archives. Piece by piece, the mystery surrounding Harrison Reed and the missing vehicle began fitting together. Every new discovery increased interest. Every article attracted more collectors. Every collector attracted more money. Alicia watched it happen from a distance. The attention felt unreal. She still lived in the same apartment. She still packed Caleb's lunches. She still rode the subway to work. Yet somehow the world had begun talking about something parked outside her building. One evening, she stood by the window while city lights reflected across the glass. Caleb sat nearby doing homework. Her phone rang again. Another collector. Another inquiry. Another offer. She declined politely. The historians had advised patience. Verification was still underway. More answers were coming. Alicia ended the call and looked toward the silver key resting on the table. The object seemed smaller now somehow. Yet it carried the weight of an entire hidden history. Outside, Manhattan sparkled beneath the night sky. Inside, the silence felt different than before. Not empty. Not uncertain. Expectant. Because somewhere across the country, collectors were preparing for a battle they never expected to fight. And with every passing hour, the value of her father's forgotten car was climbing higher than anyone had imagined. 7 days earlier, Grayson Whitmore had dismissed the aging vehicle with a laugh. Now he found himself unable to stop thinking about it. The irony irritated him. Late Thursday evening, the lights of Manhattan stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, while a stack of research files covered the conference table. Historical reports, ownership records, archived photographs, expert evaluations. Every document seemed to point toward the same conclusion. The discovery was real. Grayson loosened his tie and stared at an enlarged copy of the photograph Alicia had uncovered. Harrison Reed stood beside the missing vehicle, smiling confidently at a future he could not have known would become legend. Across from him stood Alicia's father, an ordinary man suddenly connected to one of the most valuable automotive mysteries in American history. None of it made sense. "Tell me again what we know," Grayson said. His chief researcher adjusted her glasses. "The Historical Society has authenticated the photograph. 3 independent experts confirmed the vehicle identification markers. The ownership trail traces directly to Alicia Bennett's father. Grayson leaned back slowly. And the estimated value? Nobody knows anymore. The answer hung in the room. What does that mean? She slid another report across the table. Interest has become global. Private collectors in Europe are already making inquiries. Several museums have expressed interest. A few buyers are reportedly willing to spend almost any amount to secure ownership. Grayson studied the numbers. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Humility. Not because he had made a financial mistake. He had made thousands of those throughout his career. What unsettled him was something else. He had judged a person before understanding her story. He remembered Alicia standing quietly beside her son while the crowd laughed. She had not argued. She had not demanded respect. She had simply stood there holding a silver key while everyone else rushed to conclusions. The memory stayed with him. The following afternoon, curiosity pulled him somewhere unexpected. Brooklyn. His driver stopped across the street from Alicia's apartment building. Grayson remained inside the vehicle, observing quietly. He watched Alicia return home carrying grocery bags after work. He watched Caleb run toward her with the boundless energy only children possessed. He watched her smile as they disappeared inside together. There was no entourage, no luxury, no performance. Just a mother and her son. For several moments, Grayson remained silent. "Sir," his driver asked. "Are we leaving?" Grayson nodded slowly. "Yes." But as the car pulled away, he looked back once more. The woman he had dismissed at the gala no longer fit the assumptions he had made about her. Back in Manhattan, preparations for a major auction were already underway. News outlets reported new developments almost hourly. Analysts speculated about record-breaking bids. Collectors booked flights from around the world. The excitement continued building like a storm gathering strength over the ocean. Yet while investors discussed money, Alicia thought about something entirely different. That evening she sat beside Caleb on the apartment couch. The old photograph rested on the coffee table between them. "Grandpa would think all of this is funny," Caleb said. Alicia laughed softly. "Why?" "Because everybody ignored the car until they learned it was important." Alicia looked down at the photograph. Then she smiled. Sometimes people only see value after someone else tells them where to look. Outside, city lights shimmered against the darkening sky. Somewhere across Manhattan, collectors prepared their offers. Somewhere beyond the Atlantic, buyers adjusted travel plans. And somewhere deep inside Grayson Whitmore, certainty was quietly giving way to respect. Saturday evening arrived beneath a sky painted with gold and deep shades of blue as Manhattan prepared for one of the most anticipated automotive auctions in recent memory. The Grand Lexington Auction Hall glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and camera lights. Reporters lined the entrance. Luxury vehicles filled nearby streets. Private security guided guests through velvet-lined corridors, while collectors from around the world gathered beneath the historic ceiling. Inside the main hall, conversations carried the excitement of possibility. Every seat had been reserved. Every bidder had arrived prepared. Alicia Bennett stood quietly near the entrance wearing a simple navy dress that reflected elegance without trying to impress anyone. The silver key rested inside her purse. Caleb stood beside her in a dark suit borrowed from a family friend. His eyes widened as he looked around the enormous room. "Mom," he whispered. "There are so many people." Alicia smiled softly. "I know." Yet even she struggled to understand how this had become reality. 1 week earlier she had worried about tuition payments. Now she stood at the center of an event being watched across multiple continents. The old vehicle sat beneath a spotlight on the stage. Its faded navy paint had been carefully preserved. Experts had advised against restoration. Every scratch and every imperfection had become part of its story. The audience no longer saw an aging automobile. They saw history. Across the room, Grayson Whitmore entered quietly. Gone was the confidence that had accompanied his careless joke at the gala. Tonight his expression carried something different. Respect. He glanced toward Alicia. For a brief moment their eyes met. Alicia offered a polite nod. Nothing more. No resentment. No triumph. Just dignity. The gesture unsettled him more than anger ever could have. The auctioneer stepped onto the stage. The room gradually fell silent. Cameras focused forward. Bidders prepared their paddles. Anticipation filled every corner of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer announced, "we are honored to present one of the most extraordinary discoveries in modern automotive history." The spotlight brightened. Applause followed. Caleb reached for Alicia's hand. She squeezed his gently. The opening bid appeared on a massive screen behind the stage. $500,000. A murmur swept through the crowd. Then the first paddle rose. Immediately another followed. Then another. The numbers began climbing. 600,000. 800,000. $1 million. Gasps echoed through the room. Alicia felt her heartbeat quicken. She had never seen numbers like these attached to anything connected to her life. The pace accelerated. Bidders from London entered. A museum representative from California responded. A private collector from Texas joined the competition. Every increase arrived within seconds of the last. The auctioneer's voice grew faster. Excitement spread through the audience like electricity. $2 million. Then 3. Then 4. Cameras flashed continuously. Reporters typed furiously. Around the hall, people shook their heads in disbelief. Yet the bidding showed no signs of slowing. Caleb looked up at his mother. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Grandpa would not believe this. Alicia's eyes never left the stage. A small smile touched her face. I think he would. Under the brilliant lights of the auction hall, the story of a forgotten car was becoming something much larger. It was becoming proof that value does not disappear simply because the world fails to notice it. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, until the right moment arrives. The numbers continued climbing so quickly that even seasoned collectors struggled to keep pace. $4 million became 4.5. 4.5 became 5. Every new bid triggered another wave of astonishment across the auction hall. The atmosphere felt electric, suspended somewhere between history and disbelief. Alicia sat motionless beside Caleb, her fingers intertwined with his. She could hear cameras clicking. She could hear reporters whispering updates into microphones. Yet everything seemed distant now, as though the room existed behind a wall of glass. Her attention remained fixed on the vehicle beneath the spotlight. The same car that had carried her father through countless ordinary days. The same car parked outside her apartment for years without attracting a second glance. Across the room, Grayson Whitmore watched the bidding war unfold with growing humility. Every number appearing on the screen felt like a lesson delivered directly to him. 7 days earlier he had judged the vehicle within seconds. 7 days later, some of the most powerful collectors in the world were fighting for the opportunity to own it. The irony was impossible to ignore. $5,500,000. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall. A paddle rose near the front row. 6 million. Applause erupted. Several audience members shook their heads in amazement. Others laughed softly, overwhelmed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Caleb looked up at his mother. His eyes were wide with wonder. Mom, is this really happening? Alicia swallowed carefully. I think it is. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The bidding continued. A museum representative entered with another offer. A collector from London responded immediately. Then a private bidder participating remotely joined the competition. The giant screen displayed numbers that seemed almost unreal. 6,500,000. 7 million. 7,200,000. The room held its breath. The pace finally began to slow. Every new bid now carried greater weight, greater risk, greater consequence. Then came another offer. $7,500,000. Silence followed. For several long seconds nobody moved. The auctioneer scanned the room. 7,500,000. Do I have another bid? A hand rose near the back. Gasps spread through the audience. 7,800,000. More applause. More disbelief. More history. The auctioneer nodded toward the remote bidding screen. A final offer appeared. The room immediately fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. $8 million. The number glowed behind the stage. Bright. Impossible. Transformative. Nobody responded. The auctioneer waited. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the gavel came down. The sound echoed through the hall like the closing note of a symphony. Sold. For a moment nobody reacted. The magnitude of what had happened needed time to settle. Then the entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered beneath the chandeliers. Reporters rushed forward. Flashing lights illuminated the stage. Caleb threw his arms around Alicia. Tears filled her eyes. Not because of the money. Not because of the headlines that would follow. But because her father had been right all along. The value of something cannot always be measured by what people see on the surface. Sometimes its worth lives hidden inside a story waiting patiently to be discovered. And tonight, the world had finally listened. The headlines dominated news cycles for weeks, but Alicia Bennett quickly discovered that the most meaningful changes never appeared on television screens. They happened quietly. They happened at home. Summer arrived in New York wrapped in warm sunlight and long evenings. Caleb received confirmation that his tuition had been fully paid. The burden that had kept Alicia awake through countless nights disappeared at last. Yet money alone was never the ending she wanted. Her father had spent his life teaching her that blessings meant very little unless they were shared. 3 months after the auction, the Bennett Family Scholarship Fund opened its doors. The program provided educational support for children from working families across Brooklyn. Soon afterward, Alicia partnered with community leaders to establish resources for single parents struggling to balance work, childcare, and education. Every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every scholarship letter, every smiling family reminded her of where the journey had begun. The silver key remained on her desk, not as a symbol of wealth, as a reminder. One afternoon, as golden sunlight poured through the windows of the community center, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance. Grayson Whitmore. Gone were the cameras. Gone were the reporters. He carried no publicity team and no entourage. Only a small envelope. Alicia greeted him politely. Mr. Whitmore. A faint smile crossed his face. Grayson, if that is all right. She nodded. They walked through the center together while children laughed in nearby classrooms. Parents attended workshops. Volunteers organized supplies. Life moved forward. Purposefully. Quietly. Grayson looked around with genuine admiration. You built all of this. Alicia shook her head. Many people helped. He handed her the envelope. Inside was a photograph from the auction night. The moment the final bid appeared on the screen. The moment everything changed. On the back, a short handwritten note read, "Sometimes the most valuable thing in the room is the person everyone underestimated." Alicia stared at the words for several seconds. When she looked up, Grayson's expression carried none of the confidence he had worn at the gala months earlier. Only sincerity. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "Not because I misjudged the car. Because I misjudged you." Silence settled comfortably between them. Not awkward. Honest. Alicia glanced toward the children playing in the courtyard outside. Then she smiled. "We all make mistakes." Grayson released a slow breath. Most people never get the chance to learn from them. For a moment neither spoke. Warm afternoon light filled the room. Beyond the windows, New York shimmered beneath a bright blue sky. The city looked exactly the same as it had before. Yet everything felt different. Alicia folded the photograph carefully and placed it inside the envelope. "My father used to say something," she said. "What was that?" She looked toward the silver key resting on her office shelf. "Price tells you what something costs. Character tells you what it is worth." Grayson smiled. A real smile this time. Not the one that had once drawn laughter from a crowd. The kind that comes from understanding a lesson that cannot be purchased. As he prepared to leave, Caleb ran into the room carrying a soccer ball. The boy greeted him enthusiastically before racing back outside with his friends. Grayson laughed. Alicia laughed too. The sound felt light. Free. The story that had begun with judgment ended with understanding. The story that had begun with a forgotten car ended with transformed lives. And as evening sunlight painted the city gold, Alicia realized her father had left behind something far more valuable than any automobile. He had left a legacy, because true worth is never determined by appearances. It is revealed by time, character, and the lives we choose to lift along the way.